All right, welcome back to Kenya's Choice 2022. Now, last month, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission abolished sitting allowances for members of parliament with effect from August 9th. Now, the changes that now affect the 13th parliament have seen MPs threaten to disband the SRC. Well, joining me now is Lynn Mengich, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission chairperson. Thank you so much for joining me, Madam Chair. The reasoning or rationale behind this in terms of abolishing the sitting allowances was it would save the taxpayer. About how much?
The savings, we start with the members of parliament. The annual saving is 450 million, which translates to 2.2 billion for the 5-year period. The same plenary sitting is also abolished at the county assemblies, and that translates to 1.2 billion on an annual basis, which is 6 billion for the 5-year period. So in total, we're looking at 8.2 billion for both national and the county assemblies.
So what modalities or method did you use to now come to this, to abolish the sitting allowances? Was it job evaluations or other things that you looked at to justify?
The Constitution in Article 230 sets out the principles upon which the Commission will consider in determining the pay for all state officers and also non-state officers. So for this particular group, that is the state officers, we have 5 principles that govern the pay determination. The first one is about affordability and fiscal sustainability of the wage bill. The second principle is about attracting and retaining requisite skills in the public service. The third one is to recognize performance and productivity in pay. The fourth one is fairness and transparency. And the fifth principle, which is in the SRC Act, speaks of equal pay for work of equal value. So in arriving at the decision on the plenary sittings, we looked at the pay of the state officers from 2 main perspectives in those principles. Let me speak about the first one. It's about equity and fairness. Equity means that you pay, it's equal pay for work of equal value. So how do we arrive at that? We evaluate all the jobs. We carry out job evaluation, and we determine the relative job worth of jobs. So that job worth is determined looking at the grading of the job and also carrying out salary market surveys, and for state officers, that is international benchmarks to arrive at the pay for the president, which we then cascade to all the other roles. So the current grading for the role of member of parliament in the current evaluation was actually upgraded to a job grade which we refer as F1. So that grade is equivalent to the grading of a PS or the chair of a commission. It is at the same level as F1. The principle of equity dictates that the roles that are at the same level should earn the same pay. So if we look at today, the pay for F1s is at 765,000, right? For member of parliament, it's actually above that. You will see from the Gazette notice that the pay is 710 before we add the sitting allowances for committee sittings, which adds up to a maximum of about 120. So if you take the 710 and 120, it means actually their take-home is 830, which is then above the salary established for the role at F1. And that is before you now talk about plenary sittings. So if you are to add plenary sittings, that takes their pay to 910, around 920 per month, which then means you would be remunerating a member of parliament equal to a cabinet secretary, equal to a governor. So the principle of equity then dictated that we then remove plenary sittings to ensure that the pay is at the same level. So that's the first reason that we looked at. But also, if you look at plenary sittings, you actually discharge your role through plenary sittings, right? So if you then are paid an allowance for plenary sittings and you're still getting a full-time pay, it amounts to double compensation. So hence, that's the unfairness of saying pay me for sitting, and yet I'm earning a pay at the level at which they're earning at the moment.
Right.
Now, the third reason is one of affordability and fiscal sustainability. The figures I mentioned earlier, which is the savings that will accrue by scrapping this, abolishing the allowances, which is 8 billion over the 6-year period, looking at both national and the county governments, that's a huge savings to the taxpayer. As we speak, when we look at the wage bill, the PFM Act, Public Finance Management Act, stipulates that we should not be spending more than 35% on wage bill, of revenue on wage bill. So if we look at our revenue, we should not be spending more than 35%.
Right.
And the reason for that really is to ensure that we release resources for service delivery and for development. At the moment, our ratios are not good. It was to some extent affected because of the pandemic, the COVID.
Right.
So we're not doing well. We're at 56%. We're spending up to 56% of our revenue on wage bill. And what does that really mean for the taxpayer is that service delivery will suffer, development will suffer, because it just crowds out finances for that area. So from that perspective, it is very important that we manage the wage bill to the extent that we do not unduly take away money from service delivery, from development into remuneration and benefits.
So when you're talking about a wage bill of, what is it now, 930 billion?
Yes.
Even though you talked about 8 billion shillings in savings, it's still a drop in the ocean. You know, when you're looking across state officers, where else could you cut, for instance?
One of the issues about the wage bill, which is important to understand, is in a country like Kenya, because we have a growing population, right? We will continuously expand reach for services. So we've got a growing population. We must reach the citizens in terms of education, health, and many other services. So when we look at that wage bill, a large percentage is actually attributed to increasing the employees. And we've seen an increase of employees over time. So we've been growing our wage bill roughly at about 5.6%. Year on year. But out of that, if we were to net off, the wage bill that is attributed to numbers, then we would be growing at almost about 3% there. So essentially, it's important always to look at both, that wage bill is not just a factor of a growing wage bill. It is also a factor of growing because of additional employees, and that's a good thing. So in a sense, much as we are not where we should be, it's also attributed to that fact. So coming back to your question, it's a drop in the ocean? Could be, but you've said where else could we cut? One of the projects that the Commission is currently looking at is allowances in its totality for the public sector. And it's a project that we started a few months back. We are at the stage of completing the analysis, and we've seen areas that it is very possible to actually make some savings. So that's the one area that we know once that project is concluded, we will be able to make more savings. And 8 billion may look a drop in the ocean, but it's better than not doing anything at all, because that can do quite a lot in terms of services. So as we look at allowances in totality, we should be able to make more savings.
Now, of course, we know the 13th Parliament not happy about the abolition of the sitting allowances and have threatened to disband the SRC. It's not the first time that we've seen this warpath between MPs and SRC. But when does this stop? Because they'll go to court or they'll try to disrupt House business until they push their agendas through. How does the SRC actually make a difference in terms of making these savings stick and be implemented?
You will recall that last year, batch one, there was members of parliament did try to introduce a house allowance, right? And that's an example that will say, really, at the end of the day, the court did decide, and the ruling of the court was in favor of SRC. So the house allowance was not paid. The payments that had been made was recovered. So that goes to show that as long as we have done the right thing and we can support from the principles in the Constitution, then we will be making progress. Yeah.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for coming in and shedding light on this issue. Of course, it remains to be seen whether the 13th Parliament actually takes this to court and goes the legal route. All right, on that note, we take a short break here on Kenya's Choice 2022. Sports news coming up next. Stay with us.